A lone figure walks through a scarred landscape. His saffron robes catch the wind as he steps carefully, deliberately. The path ahead is uncertain. This is territory where landmines still hide beneath the earth. The man is Maha Ghosananda, the Gandhi of Cambodia, and he is walking through Cambodia's killing fields to pray for peace. To understand why, we must go back to April 17th, 1975. Back to when Cambodia's revolutionaries tried to erase the sacred, but didn't know what they were truly fighting. Welcome to Bodhisattvas in the Shadow, the Cambodian Buddhist Resistance, a documentary from the Yellow Leaf. Picture, if you will, a land where 70,000 monks moved like living prayers across emerald rice fields. Cambodia, where over 3,000 temples rose like islands of peace in an ocean of daily life. For more than a millennium, Theravāda Buddhism wasn't just a religion here. It was the beating heart of civilization. Every village boy spent time as a novice monk. Every elder sought counsel from the Sangha. Every family celebration, every funeral, every harvest blessing flowed through these saffron-robed guardians of memory. But what happens when an entire government decides that memory is the enemy? What occurs when revolutionaries declare war not just on their political opponents, but on the very concept of the sacred? April 17th, 1975, the day the unthinkable began. The Khmer Rouge didn't just want political change. They wanted to reset human civilization. Picture their vision. No cities. No money. No schools. No hospitals. No families as we understand them. Every citizen would become a peasant farmer in an agrarian paradise. Intellectual thought would be treason. The very concept of the past, forbidden. They called it Year Zero. But Pol Pot had studied in the monasteries as a boy. He knew exactly what stood in his way. Buddhism taught acceptance of suffering. The revolution demanded rage. Buddhism preached detachment from material concerns. The revolution required total commitment to worldly transformation. Buddhism honored the wisdom of the past. The revolution demanded its complete destruction. And there was something else. Something that drove the Khmer Rouge to levels of paranoia that would shock even Stalin. Ancient fears about to become modern nightmares. The Khmer Rouge's paranoia had deep historical roots. For centuries, Cambodia had watched its territory shrink, not through dramatic conquest, but through gradual absorption. During the 17th and 18th centuries, Vietnamese settlers had pushed west into the Mekong Delta, land that had been Khmer since the Angkor period. What Cambodians called Kampuchea Krom, Lower Cambodia, became South Vietnam. Khmer villages became Vietnamese villages. Ancient temples were abandoned or destroyed. By the 1970s, this territorial anxiety had become cultural paranoia. The Khmer Rouge spoke of Vietnamese bodies with Khmer heads, claiming that ethnic Vietnamese had infiltrated Cambodia and were controlling puppet Cambodians. But this wasn't really about Vietnamese people. It was about something deeper, something more primal. The fear that foreigners were diluting pure Khmer culture, that outsiders were secretly controlling society, that the real Cambodia was disappearing through contamination by the other. To Pol Pot, even Cambodians who had lived near the Vietnamese border were suspect. anyone who spoke Vietnamese, anyone with Vietnamese relatives, anyone who had ever traded with Vietnamese merchants, anyone whose purity could be questioned. This wasn't just political strategy. It was the weaponization of xenophobia itself. In 1977, Pol Pot's paranoia exploded into violence. Cambodian forces crossed the border, massacring entire Vietnamese villages. But Vietnam in 1978 wasn't the colonial victim of old. This was a nation that had defeated France, bested America, and learned the deadly lessons of modern warfare. On December 25, 1978, Christmas Day, 150,000 Vietnamese troops invaded Cambodia. 2 weeks later, Phnom Penh fell. The Khmer Rouge fled to the jungles. Their reign of terror was over. But in those 4 years of darkness, the damage to Buddhism had been catastrophic. Between 1975 and 1979, the Khmer Rouge had methodically dismantled Cambodia's spiritual foundation. What they did to Buddhism was clinical, systematic, complete. 70,000 monks, reduced to fewer than 3,000. Over 95% of Cambodia's temples desecrated or destroyed. But the numbers tell only part of the story. The Khmer Rouge didn't simply execute monks. They forced them to violate every sacred vow first. Monks were compelled to marry, to eat meat, to kill animals, to break their vows of celibacy, nonviolence, and compassion. And then they were murdered for having once taken those vows. Sacred texts were fed to flames. Buddha statues were smashed with sledgehammers. Temple libraries that had preserved knowledge for centuries turned to ash. It seemed like total victory. But they had made one crucial miscalculation. They thought they were fighting buildings and books. They didn't understand what they were truly up against. During the darkest years of Khmer Rouge rule, something extraordinary was happening in the shadows. While monks were dying by the thousands, temples were being dynamited and ancient libraries were burned to ash. In scattered villages, a few refused to let the Dharma die completely. They couldn't build temples. They couldn't gather openly. They couldn't even admit they had once been monks. So they found other ways. Former monks working as forced laborers would tap out Buddhist chants on their hose, silent rhythms that reminded them they were still human. Mothers teaching their children to count would whisper the numbers in Pali instead of Khmer, preserving the sacred language one breath at a time. When guards weren't watching, a farmer might trace mantras in the mud with his finger, then smooth them away before anyone could see. Families would hide tiny Buddha amulets inside rice balls, swallowing and retrieving them daily to keep something sacred close to their hearts. This wasn't just organized resistance. This was spiritual survival. Individual acts of faith in a world that had declared faith itself a crime. And when the Vietnamese finally liberated Cambodia in 1979, these scattered embers of memory would become the foundation for something remarkable. As Cambodia bled, hundreds of thousands fled toward the Thai border. Among them were the monks who had survived by hiding their true identities for 4 years. In refugee camps like Khao Dang, these men could finally remove their masks, could put on robes again, could admit to being what they had always been. And then the real work began. They had carried nothing across the border but their memories. No books, no statues, no gold. Just the Tripitaka, 45 volumes of Buddhist scripture, perfectly preserved in their minds. Using tarps as temple walls and tin cans as prayer bells, they began the systematic reconstruction of Cambodian Buddhism from memory alone. Night after night, these surviving monks would recite entire texts aloud while younger refugees transcribed them by hand. Children born in exile learned to chant in Pali, a language older than Latin. Elders who had given up hope found reason to live in the sound of familiar prayers. This wasn't just preservation, it was preparation. Buddhism was already taking root in the West. Japanese teachers had established Zen centers. Tibetan refugees had brought their wisdom after fleeing Chinese occupation, and a generation of Western seekers was hungry for Eastern spirituality. But the Cambodian refugees would bring something unique to this growing movement. From these makeshift temples, Cambodian Dharma was about to join a global awakening. From refugee camps, Cambodian monks began journeying to places that had never seen Theravāda Buddhism. To Lowell, Massachusetts, where Cambodian refugees built the first Khmer temple in New England, complete with traditional architecture and the lingering scent of homeland incense. To Long Beach, California, where monks blessed babies born in exile, creating the first generation of American Cambodian Buddhists. To Lyon, France. To Melbourne, Australia. To Vancouver, Canada. Each temple became something unprecedented. A sanctuary for trauma, a repository for memory, and a bridge between worlds. In these diaspora communities, Buddhism wasn't just surviving, it was evolving. Monks who had memorized ancient texts in hiding now taught children who spoke English better than Khmer. Traditional ceremonies were adapted for Western calendars. Ancient wisdom met modern therapy as survivors processed trauma through meditation and community healing. But one monk wasn't content to build temples in exile. He was planning something that would shock the world. A return to the killing fields. (1992). 13 years after the Vietnamese liberation, Cambodia was technically at peace, but the Khmer Rouge had regrouped. From their jungle hideouts, they had rebuilt their forces and now controlled vast swaths of western Cambodia. Landmines still littered the countryside. Fear ruled every village. Into this landscape walked Maha Ghosananda. His first Dhammayietra, pilgrimage of truth, covered 125 miles through some of the most dangerous territory on Earth. The route passed through active minefields, past mass graves, through villages where neighbors had killed neighbors. 350 Cambodians joined that first walk, refugees returning from border camps, monks emerging from hiding, villagers who had survived in silence. By the time they reached Phnom Penh, over 1,000 Cambodians had joined the procession. Each step was an act of radical faith. "Hatred never ceases by hatred," he would chant as they walked, the ancient words of the Buddha from the Dhammapada. Only by love is hatred overcome. The walks continued annually through the 1990s. In 1995, the pilgrimage focused on landmine awareness, collecting 20,000 signatures to ban these hidden killers. In 1996, they protested deforestation. In 1997, they walked directly into Khmer Rouge territory, offering blessings to the very soldiers who had tried to destroy them. Ghosananda even blessed Yengsuri, the Khmer Rouge leader known as Brother Number 3. The criticism was immediate and fierce. How could he forgive the unforgivable? His answer was simple. If I do not forgive, the anger will destroy me, and then they will have won twice. Today in the Wat Buddharaksa Temple in Lowell, Massachusetts, the morning air fills with sounds that were once forbidden in Cambodia. Children who have never known war chant alongside elders who remember everything. Their voices rise together, young and old, traumatized and hopeful. In the corner sits a Buddha statue carved with trembling hands by a monk who survived 4 years of forced labor. On the walls hang photographs of monks who died rather than abandon their vows. This temple serves as more than a place of worship. It's a community center where Cambodian Americans gather for festivals, ceremonies, and cultural preservation, where elders pass down traditions to children born far from the homeland. Here and around the world, the sacred texts they tried to burn live on in voices that will not be silenced. The temples they tried to destroy have risen again on 6 continents. The tradition they tried to erase has adapted, evolved, and spread to places they never imagined. Today, over 2 million Cambodians live in the diaspora. They have built over 200 temples worldwide. They have ordained thousands of new monks. They have preserved languages, ceremonies, and wisdom that nearly disappeared forever. But perhaps most remarkably, they have done all of this without hatred. In Cambodia itself, Buddhism has been officially restored. There are now over 4,000 active temples. Over 50,000 monks serve communities across the country. The Extraordinary Chambers, Cambodia's genocide tribunal, has incorporated Buddhist healing ceremonies into its proceedings. The lotus has indeed bloomed from the deepest mud. What can we learn from those who chose forgiveness over vengeance? From those who preserved light in absolute darkness? The Cambodian Buddhist resistance teaches us that the most powerful response to hatred is to transform it through compassion. But their story reveals something else, something urgent for our time. The tactics the Khmer Rouge used were not unique to Cambodia. Throughout history, authoritarian movements have followed a predictable pattern. First, they target the educated, dismissing expertise as elitism, knowledge as conspiracy. Then they attack institutions that teach critical thinking, universities, libraries, independent media. They weaponize fear of the other. They speak of cultural contamination, of pure societies being diluted by foreign influence. They claim that empathy itself is betrayal, that showing compassion for outsiders is treason against your own people. They promise to restore a mythical past by destroying the present. Sound familiar? The Cambodian monks understood something we must remember. When hatred becomes policy, when empathy becomes treason, when learning becomes dangerous, the time for silence has passed. But they also showed us the way forward. Not through violence, not through hatred in return, through stubborn, persistent love that refuses to surrender, through the quiet preservation of truth when truth becomes treason, through the radical act of remaining human when others choose to become monsters. Until the world remembers what it means to be awake.